Was the mysterious Manna machine an alien technology that produced food for Israel for 40 years? That's the question. What was the mysterious substance provided by God to the Israelites to overcome the hunger in the wilderness for 40 years? In the Old Testament of the Bible, the manna is referred to as food, edible substance, provided by God during the exodus of the people of Israel. Remember that they had to pick it up before the sun's rays hit the ground. Once the sun's rays hit the ground, manna would dissolve into the ground. And the very strange thing about it is that they could heat it and cook it. In other words, heating it didn't dissolve it, and they would eat it. But the strange thing is that when they ate it, the taste of manna was what each person wished they would be eating. Like one person wanted to have roast lamb with potatoes, another one wanted to have a lentil soup, another one wanted to have, I don't know, egg salad sandwich, whatever. So each one would have that taste of what he wished in his mouth by eating manna. And that's, of course, very clearly described in the Old Testament. Now, the Bible discusses the sufferance of the Jewish people in Egypt. It explains how the Israelites got out of Egypt, where they had been slaves, and they left to go to the Promised Land. They had to cross the Sinai Desert, and inevitably, given that there was a lot of Israelites and very little food, as it was a desert, they ran short of supplies. At this point, in order to prevent the population from starving, God sent down manna from heaven daily. And every Friday they had to pick for 2 days. They had to pick for Friday and Saturday. And from what I remember, it was over 4 kilos per person. So that was quite a lot. Again, from the Old Testament. Now, as it fell to earth, manna is described as some kind of a seed, and these seeds were connected the day after they had fallen to earth. Manna provided food for the Israelites every day except Friday, since on Saturday, the Sabbath, it did not fall. Okay, so on Friday they had to collect for Friday and Saturday, 2 days, because they had to observe the Sabbath. They couldn't collect. In the biblical book of the Exodus, it's written that manna appeared every night and every morning after the dew disappeared, and that it had to be collected before the heat of the sun melted it. According to historical accounts, manna arrived with the dew at night. It's described as a kind of a seed similar to that of coriander, white, which after being ground and baked resembles wafers with honey, although in some accounts it's described as being the same color as Indian myrrh. There are 2 descriptions referring to manna in the Hebrew Bible. Manna is described twice, both in Exodus 16, 1-36, and once again in Numbers 11, 1-9. In Exodus, it's described as a fine flake-like thing similar to the frost on the ground. In the 4th book of Moses, manna is detailed as arriving with the dew during the night. In the book, there are details of manna resembling bdellium, a semi-transparent oleo gum resin extracted from trees growing in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and sub-Saharan Africa. So basically, manna was food sent by God to keep the population from starving. But still, it's unknown what it was. In the book of Exodus, Israelites were told only to eat manna they had gathered for each day, as stored manna bred worms and stank. However, curiously, the manna stored the day before Sabbath did not spoil overnight, and is clearly stated in Exodus 16, 23-24. Some believe that the Zohar, a collection of spiritual commentaries and interpretations of the Torah, and is central to the mystical Kabbalah belief written in the 13th century, may offer more details about this mysterious food source. In the Zohar, there are descriptions of what is referred to as the Ancient of Days providing the manna, that is, God providing manna. And according to the book of Daniel, the Ancient of Days is the name of God. In the Christian Orthodox Christian myths and icons, the Ancient of Days is sometimes identified as God the Father, or occasionally the Holy Spirit. Ancient astronaut theorist Giorgio Tsoukalos said, "The text speaks of different sized brains, different sized faces that were connected with different tubes and different light sources. Theologians have suggested that this was a description of God. However, when looked at from a modern perspective, what's described in the Zohar is not necessarily a God figure, but rather a type of a machine. And despite the fact that theologians have suggested that this is a description of God, ancient astronaut theorists argue that from modern perspective, what's described in the Zohar is not necessarily a God figure, but rather a type of machine, a machine that somehow produced manna, a mysterious food source that has still not been identified, despite the fact that numerous historical accounts suggest that it was real." The manna machine theory offers two explanations as to where the Israelites may have gotten it from. One suggests they stole it from the Egyptians before their exodus, while the other, more controversial one, suspects extraterrestrials gave it to them as a humanitarian gesture to prevent their starvation in the desert. Either way, the answer, like the Ark of the Covenant, seems lost to history. In 1978, George Sassoon and Rodney Dale wrote a book which was based upon a translation of the section of the Zohar called The Ancient of Days. In the book, the authors conclude that manna was produced by a machine that had created algae as a food for human beings in biblical times. The so-called manna machine was eventually produced by George, who was an engineer, who is said to have followed the directions given by the Ancient of Days, and after creating the machine, he claimed it created a food source of algae. Furthermore, this explains how the Israelites survived their 40-year journey in the Sinai desert. It's said that Sassoon and Dale that a nuclear reactor used to power the manna machine was stored within the Ark of the Covenant. Today, scientists have successfully pioneered a process that produces a substance high in protein by means of solar energy, water vapor, and chlorella algae. Could this be a duplication of alien technology from thousands of years ago? And this is by Vicky Verma on House and Wise. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. I personally believe that it was one of the mysteries of God. There are certain miracles that nature and scientists can't explain. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.